Harriet had always found the mail a mundane, near ritualistic aspect of life: bills, advertisements, occasional letters from old friends. Nothing ever arrived that was worth a surge of adrenaline or a twist in her stomach. That was, until 2 weeks ago. Late that night, long after she had closed her eyes, an envelope was slipped under her door. It came without postage or a return address. In the morning, she found it lying at a slight angle beneath her feet, her name scrawled with unsettling precision. Unsealing it, she discovered a single page, a brevity that did not match the weight of its content. At the top, in bold, were the words, "Timeline of a seat," followed by dates and cryptic notes. The handwriting was typed, almost too neat, unnervingly organized. Each date was associated with a short phrase that referenced a specific prohibited memory from her past memories Harriet had prayed were locked away forever. They were described only by evocative key words: first betrayal, the accident, broken promise, and on it went. The letter concluded with a warning that 4 days from now, catastrophe would strike anew. "Your darkest secrets have ushered in a chain of unstoppable events," it read. "Atone or face the consequences." Harriet felt a flush of cold along her spine as she read, grappling with how someone could know details she had shared with no one. She folded the paper, pressed it between her palms, and saw with a distant kind of horror that her hands trembled. Over the course of the day, she tried to dismiss its significance. She brushed it off as a prank, some twisted way for an old foe to unnerve her. But as the hours rolled on, she found she could not set aside the mounting sense of dread. That night, Harriet tried to distract herself by reading, turning pages of a paperback novel without absorbing a single sentence. Whenever she exhaled, the letter's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of a timeline in which all of her regrets, all of her worst memories, were inexorably linked to future disasters. She tossed and turned, glancing at her phone for the time, hyper-aware that the first date on the letter was tomorrow. When morning broke, Harriet decided she would keep her routine. She had always been methodical. An early shower, a brisk walk to the coffee shop near her apartment, a silent commute to the library where she worked as a historian's assistant. Another day under fluorescent lights, meticulously scanning old documents, organizing references, and living in the quiet sea of archives. If anything unusual happened during the day, if the letter's predictions came true, she would know the letter wasn't a joke. And though a part of her wanted to tear it up and forget, another part needed to know. The letter had declared that on Tuesday at 10:15 a.m., an event linked to first betrayal would unfold. Harriet arrived early, scanning the clock that ticked along the library wall. She prepared the day's tasks with extra care, keeping her eyes peeled for any sign of something catastrophic. At precisely 10:15, a chilling scream echoed from the corridor behind the shelves. She rushed in that direction, finding an elderly female patron on the ground, clutching her purse, her eyes wide with terror. The woman mumbled something about a man who had demanded her wallet before sprinting away. But a robbery rare for their usually safe library. Staff hovered around, calling for help. All Harriet could think about was how first betrayal referred to a friend she had maltreated years ago. She tried telling herself the two incidents were unrelated, but an unsettling piece of her mind made a connection. Harriet had betrayed that friend in the library they both frequented. She took a deep breath, feeling as if the walls were shrinking around her. Could it be mere coincidence? Was someone orchestrating these random acts to unnerve her? She left work early, her nerves frayed. Footsteps echoed behind her on the city sidewalk, but each time she turned, no one was there. Back home, in the silence of her small living room, she carefully reread the letter. Another date, just 96 hours away, was labeled Broken Promise. The cryptic note beneath that read, "You always said you'd confess the truth." Harriet's mind spun back to the vow she had made to her late grandmother. She'd promised to come clean about a grave mistake, one that had weighed on Harriet's conscience, and she never did. As she tried to settle in for the night, Harriet's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "How was work? A robbery at the library, yes?" Her heart slammed in her chest. She typed back frantic demands to know who was texting her, but the only reply was a single chilling instruction. Pull out the second envelope. You'll find it taped beneath your bed." Harriet froze. She had never noticed anything like that. Her eyes darted across the walls of her apartment, scanning corners as if someone might be watching. After a moment's paralysis, she mustered the courage to crawl beneath the bed, feeling along the wooden frame. And she found it. An envelope taped there with clear, sturdy packing tape. Inside was a sheet of paper, again typed neatly, referencing tomorrow's date, and a place in Harriet's past, a dusty church courtyard. It contained only a single line: "Face your guilt, or the next tragedy escalates." Harriet's mind reeled. At some point, she must have let out a half-sob, half-gasp. She could barely recall the last time she'd visited that courtyard, when she was 12, rummaging with a friend for lost coins. She remembered lying to her mother about it, telling her she was with a youth group, volunteering. That harmless fib, Harriet thought, was hardly something to blackmail her with. But that was the place she had also done something else. Her darkest deed as a child, buried the evidence that exposed her teacher's wrongdoing. A teacher Harriet was terrified might retaliate. Anxious tears coated her cheeks as she realized the letter's author must know secrets Harriet had long since buried, literally and metaphorically. The next morning, Harriet shoved the note into her coat pocket and headed for the church. Unwilling to face this alone, she called the only person she trusted, her friend Irene. Irene was a calm presence, an artist with a gentle streak who had also known Harriet's childhood secrets. Harriet hoped Irene could help her see reason. Irene sounded both worried and confused by Harriet's frantic way of explaining the letter. However, she agreed to meet at the church courtyard for moral support. Harriet arrived first. Weeds sprouted through the cracks in the pavement, and the courtyard seemed gloomier than she remembered. She waited near a rusted wrought iron bench. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Irene was absent, and Harriet tapped out a message on her phone, but it delivered with no response. Alone in the courtyard, Harriet felt suddenly exposed. The wind gusted, scattering dead leaves. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she raised it to see a new text from the unknown number. "Mired in guilt. Check beneath the bench." "Leave me alone," Harriet typed back, her fear shifting to anger. But again no answer. She hesitated, then glanced under the bench. Taped to the underside was a small slip of paper. She pulled it free, cutting her finger in the process. A single word was printed there: "Wait." Harriet's frustration mounted, but she forced herself to do exactly that. Wait. Her phone buzzed once more. Another text told her, "You'll see." The tension, the confusion, the lack of control was almost unbearable. A minute later, Harriet heard footsteps. She turned, her heart hammering, only to see Irene approaching. With a worried expression, Irene said, "I'm sorry I'm late. The train was delayed." Harriet let out a breath of relief and quickly ushered her friend onto the bench, explaining everything about the letter in detail. She recounted the library's robbery, how it coincided with the timeline's date for Harriet's first betrayal, and how the next item on the letter's list was broken prom. The line, "Face your guilt," stared at her from the slip of paper. Irene listened intently, her face clouded with concern. She consoled Harriet by saying it was probably the work of a malicious stalker, maybe someone from Harriet's past who had pieced together these events. "Let's go to the police," Irene insisted. Harriet agreed. But as soon as they stood, Harriet's phone rang with an unknown number. She glanced at the phone, her cheeks numb from the cold and the anxiety. Irene motioned for Harriet to ignore it, but Harriet lifted the phone anyway, hoping to confront whoever was behind this torment. A muffled voice, through some sort of mechanical distortion, said, "If you go to the police, you won't just lose your reputation. Others will share in your devastation." The line disconnected. It stole Harriet's breath, that single phrase, so direct and harrowing. Irene looked at Harriet's expression and asked, "What did they say?" Harriet's voice came out in a rasp. "They threaten more people if we go to the police." She sank back onto the bench. Could she risk it? Irene reached for Harriet's hand, urging her to keep calm. They decided to at least gather more evidence before taking action. Irene offered to stay with Harriet that night, half to support her friend half to ensure Harriet's safety. The next day marked the date labeled Broken Promise. Harriet and Irene spent the morning picking through Harriet's old diaries and photo albums, searching for any clue as to how someone might know these intimately guarded details. It was a painful exercise, but Harriet felt compelled to re-examine her past, hoping for an explanation of who was behind the letter. Old photographs spilled over the coffee table, and Harriet recounted the story of her grandmother's final request. Harriet was supposed to confess to a friend that she had lied about a tragic accident. The confession never happened. She'd kept silent for years, afraid of the consequences. At noon, a news alert flashed on Irene's phone. An explosion at a gas station on the other side of town. Harriet's heart seized as she looked at Irene, the timing suspiciously close to the next event on the letter's timeline. She read the article with a trembling hand. A random spark ignited a propane tank, injuring 2 people. Harriet had no direct link to that gas station, but anxiety flooded her, certain that it was no random accident. Someone was orchestrating these tragedies at the exact times predicted by the letter. Harriet stared at the phone. "Broken promise," she whispered, and closed her eyes. Over the next few days, Harriet barely left her apartment. Irene made phone calls to her own contacts, including a few acquaintances in cybersecurity, but nobody could trace the unknown number or provide a lead on how Harriet was being spied upon. Irene slept on Harriet's couch, while Harriet catnapped on her bed in fits, jolting awake at every creak. The city sounds outside felt ominous, as if watchers lurked at every corner. One night, Harriet dreamt of the typed letter chasing her through a labyrinth of old library shelves, the aisles lined with dusty volumes of her secrets. On the 6th day since Harriet first received the letter, Irene decided they should at least venture outside for a change of scenery. Harriet reluctantly agreed. They visited a coffee shop where the barista recognized Harriet and asked if everything was all right. Harriet appeared anxious. Harriet fumbled for a reassuring smile, but it came off forced. The 2 friends sat at a cornered table in hesitant conversation. They avoided the topic of the letter until Harriet's phone vibrated with a new text. She snatched it off the table. "Your third reckoning awaits. Friday, 2 p.m., playground lies." A memory bobbed to the surface of Harriet's mind. She had been 9, telling a false story in the school cafeteria about a classmate, fueling a cruel rumor that had ended in the classmate's humiliation. It was a shameful event Harriet had never told a soul about. She looked up at Irene, face pale. "How can anyone know about that?" Harriet whispered. Irene stared at the phone, speechless. The text concluded with, "Return to the place where it happened, or an even darker secret emerges." Despite the distress, Harriet felt a grim determination building in her chest. She was tired of being manipulated like a puppet. She turned to Irene. "We must go," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "We have to face it." Irene squeezed her friend's hand, nodding with concern. On Friday, a cold wind swept through the deserted playground behind Harriet's old elementary school. The metal swings squeaked in the breeze, and the giant oak that had once shaded Harriet's childhood recess stood as a silent sentinel. Harriet and Irene waited, eyes alert. At 2 p.m., an unfamiliar figure entered through a break in the fence. Tall, cloaked in a hooded jacket, they strode carefully over the gravel near the monkey bars. Harriet's stomach churned. "Is that them?" she whispered. Irene stepped forward, protective. "Who are you?" she asked. The figure paused, then spoke in a distorted voice. "I see you brought a friend. Dangerous choice." Harriet's pulse thundered. The figure reached into an inside pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. They placed it on the edge of a swing seat, letting the breeze flap it gently before Harriet's eyes. "You'll find your next date there," the figure said. "No more warnings. Only escalation if you resist." Without waiting for Harriet to pick up the paper, the figure turned and walked away, steps crunching on the gravel. Irene tried to follow, but the figure dashed swiftly to the fence, slipped through, and vanished. Harriet, unable to find her voice, stumbled forward and carefully lifted the paper from the swing. She opened it. Inside was a single typed line. "The next tragedy strikes in 2 days. Check your mailbox at midnight. Prepare to lose what you cherish most. They rushed to the fence, but the figure was gone. Feeling powerless, Harriet fell to her knees, pressing her forehead against the swing's cold metal chains. How could she allow someone to keep tormenting her like this? Irene stood by, silent yet supportive, her hand on Harriet's shoulder, lifting her gently. Back at Harriet's apartment, the two agreed this was beyond them. Mustering courage, Harriet made the decision. We have to involve the police. I can't let them keep controlling my life. A part of her was terrified about the threat, but continuing in fear forever was equally unthinkable. Irene helped Harriet gather the letters, texts, screenshots, and all available evidence. They called the non-emergency line, booked an appointment with a detective Harriet had met once during a library research project. When they arrived at the station, Harriet was shaking, but she recounted the entire ordeal, the suspicious timing of the tragedies, and the personal knowledge this unknown tormentor possessed. Detective Rollins listened gravely. He took notes, examined the evidence, and promised to look into the matter. Yet Harriet sensed skepticism. These events appear random, Rollins said, and while it's possible someone is orchestrating them, forging a direct link may be difficult. We'll do our due diligence, but please keep us updated. Harriet left, feeling both slightly relieved to have shared her burden and dismayed at how intangible this threat remained. Shortly before midnight, Harriet and Irene paced in the living room, ears pricked for any sound of footsteps outside. At exactly midnight, Harriet peeked through the peephole. Sure enough, she heard a soft drag of paper against wood. Someone slid something under the door. Irene leaned over to pick up a small envelope. They opened it together, hearts pounding. Inside was no typed letter, but a small Polaroid photograph. Harriet's face flushed with horror. The image depicted her on the day of the broken promise, beside her grandmother's hospital bed. A vulnerable teenage Harriet with tears on her cheek. Harriet had never known anyone was there taking a photo. It looked like it was shot from behind a curtain. On the back, a single sentence was written. Next time, I document your worst sin. Harriet felt adrenaline surge. Her worst sin invoked a memory she had tried to bury for years. A drunken night of recklessness that resulted in a disastrous car accident. Though no one was seriously injured, Harriet had fled the scene, petrified of legal repercussions, never owning up. The letter's warning suggested that the unknown adversary could expose proof of Harriet's guilt. Irene squeezed Harriet's arm lightly, trying to calm her. We can't let them do this. It's blackmail. We'll gather everything, present it to Detective Rollins tomorrow. Morning light found them at the station again. Rollins took the Polaroid, but cautioned that finding the culprit wouldn't be easy. Is there anyone who could gain from blackmailing you about your past? He asked. Harriet shook her head, tears forming. She had no known enemies who would go to these lengths. Rollins promised to assign an officer to patrol near Harriet's apartment. There was some relief in that, but Harriet couldn't shake the sense that something cataclysmic was about to happen. When Harriet and Irene returned home, they found the front door ajar. Irene grabbed Harriet's arm, signaling her to be careful. They crept inside, but the intruder was long gone. The living room was oddly untouched, but Harriet's desk drawers were ransacked, her computer screen cracked. The only new object was a note taped to the inside of the front door. 2 days remain before your final reckoning. You will meet me, or everyone learns the truth. With new determination, Harriet tried to recall the final date on that typed timeline in the original letter. Yes, it was tomorrow, labeled Judgment Day, with an hour scrawled in red, 8 p.m. Harriet had never been so afraid and so weary at the same time. She knew nothing she did might stop this unraveling chain, but could she at least face it on her terms? Irene agreed to meet the stalker's demand, but insisted on a plan. That evening, they prepared a hidden recording device in Harriet's pocket and arranged for her friend, Alex, to surreptitiously observe from a distance. If the meeting took place in a public enough space, maybe they could unmask the culprit. Harriet texted the unknown number, demanding a location. The reply came swiftly. The abandoned greenhouse near the old train yard. 8 p.m. Come alone. Although the instructions said come alone, Harriet was not about to forgo any protection. She informed Irene to remain concealed outside the greenhouse, and Alex would watch from an adjacent lot. Detective Rollins was also alerted, though Harriet couldn't be sure he would arrive in time. As the night deepened, Harriet made her way to the greenhouse. Without functioning lights, it loomed as an eerie silhouette. Shadows of broken glass and twisted vines crisscrossed over Harriet's shoes. Her breath clouded in front of her. She stepped carefully, tension vibrating in every muscle. A figure emerged from behind a tangle of plants, face hidden partially by a hood. Harriet paused, swallowing her fear. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, voice echoing off the glass panels. The figure said nothing at first, then gestured Harriet closer. She advanced a step. The figure raised a gloved hand and pulled back the hood, revealing short, dark hair. Eyes that flickered with a strange mix of anger and triumph. Harriet's heart nearly buckled. She recognized the face, though it had changed over the years. It was Carla, a classmate Harriet had tormented with rumors back in 5th grade. The same girl who Harriet had once called a friend, then named a cheat and a liar behind her back. Harriet's chest constricted. "Carla," Harriet breathed. Why?" She knew the question was foolish the moment she asked. Carla's features twisted. "You destroyed me in that playground, Harriet," Carla hissed. "You fed rumors. You spread lies. People believed you. My family had to move because of my mother's job and everyone thinking I was trouble. And it didn't end there, did it? You left wounds in your wake, your betrayal, your broken promises, your dreadful secrets. You act so innocent, Harriet, living a quiet life in your library, but you never paid for what you did. You never apologized." Fear mixed with guilt. Harriet's mind flailed. I was just a child," she stammered. I didn't know it would go that far." Carla's expression hardened. "But that was only the beginning of my ruin. Did you ever consider how your actions might ripple through someone else's life?" She stepped closer, glass crunching underfoot. "I spent years hunting for any advantage, building a web of your darkest secrets. I braced your entire life with the knowledge that eventually I'd come for you." Harriet wanted to defend herself, to cry that she'd never intended such harm, but Carla advanced again, pressing something into Harriet's hands. A flash drive. "All the evidence is on here," Carla said flatly. "Your car accident, your unpaid debts, your hidden transgressions. Don't lie. I have testimonies, photos, recordings. The next tragedy was already in motion. I wanted you to get a taste of the panic and helplessness." Carla's voice wavered up an octave. "The plan was to leak everything, your entire timeline of terror, if you didn't come clean. But now you have a choice." Harriet's throat closed. "What do you want me to do?" she managed, tears in her eyes. Carla tapped a phone in her pocket. "Confess," she said simply. "Call the police, own up to every crime and deception, big or small. Then you publicly apologize to every person you hurt. That is the only way to end this. Otherwise, I'll destroy everything you care about. Your job, your safety, your relationships, just like you destroyed me." Harriet's mind reeled. She knew she had no real alternative, but dread set in. Could she truly face the shame and repercussions? Slowly, Harriet found words. "Carla, I'm sorry. I can't undo the past, but I see how much pain I caused you. I don't want any more secrets. I'll do it." She paused, tears streaking her cheeks. "I will confess." From the greenhouse's darkness, Irene emerged, heartbreak evident in her eyes from overhearing Harriet's admission. Through the cracked walls, Harriet glimpsed Alex standing by the entrance, phone in hand. In the distance, red and blue lights flickered. Detective Rollins had arrived. Carla's eyes shifted warily. "You lied about coming alone," she spat. Harriet spread her hands in a gesture of peace. "We had to protect ourselves. But that doesn't change my decision. I'll do what you ask." Shouts of "Police!" rolled through the greenhouse. Carla turned, ready to make a run for it. Harriet lunged, grabbing Carla's arm. "Don't go," Harriet cried. "It's over." Carla shook Harriet loose, tears glimmering in her own eyes. Yes, Carla whispered, it is over. Our entire world seemed to freeze for a moment as Carla stared at Harriet, then pivoted and sprinted among the scattered shards of glass and decaying plants. Detective Rollins and several officers gave chase, barking instructions to stand down. A flash of movement beyond the greenhouse door, the clang of fences. Harriet rushed after them, heart pounding. She glimpsed Carla farther down the train yard, stumbling in the gloom. Then an officer tackled Carla to the ground, the two of them collapsing amid weeds and broken tracks. Harriet arrived, panting, tears in her eyes. She wanted to speak, to end this nightmare in a way that might bring closure. Carla looked up at Harriet, her breath ragged, fury and sorrow etched across her face. Harriet felt something fracturing inside her. She had let this wound fester for so many years, pushing it out of her mind. For Carla, every day had been overshadowed by Harriet's betrayal. The officers got Carla to her feet, cuffing her. As they marched her away, Carla's parting words haunted Harriet more than any letter. You can't run from who you are, Harriet. It's time the world sees the real you. When Detective Rollins asked Harriet if she wanted to press charges, Harriet paused. Her entire body shook from the culmination of fear and remorse. She looked at Irene, who nodded supportively, but left the choice to Harriet. Slowly, Harriet bowed her head. I have to make things right, she said. I'll give a statement, but I won't ask for Carla to be locked away for longer than necessary. I'm the one who needs to confess. Let me do that, please. That night, Harriet summoned more courage than she ever had. She confessed her part in the old rumors, the broken promise to her grandmother, the car accident she'd fled. She provided full details to Detective Rollins, ready to face whatever consequences came. As the hours rolled on, she found a sense of weight lifting from her. She had dreaded this moment for years, but she realized, ironically, that the fear of exposure was more crippling than the exposure itself. In the weeks that followed, Harriet's name appeared in local papers as part of an ongoing investigation into Carla's carefully orchestrated tragedies. Carla was charged with counts of blackmail, harassment, and probable conspiracy in stoking the library robbery or gas station explosion. The final details were yet to unfold. Meanwhile, Harriet found herself in court, owning up to her old misdeeds. Some charges fell outside the statute of limitations, but Harriet faced public shame. Yet Irene stood by her side, unwavering. Even Alex, who had once known Harriet only distantly, offered moral support. One rainy afternoon, Harriet sat on a courtyard bench far from the city center, the letter and the Polaroids in her lap. She watched the droplets pool on the envelope. With every passing second, she felt the strangling hold of fear loosening. She had stepped forward, unveiling her secrets to the world. No more hidden timelines, no more cryptic threats. Though the future was far from certain, Harriet discovered an unexpected relief in vulnerability. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of redemption, no matter how painful the path might be. She gazed at the letters' typed warnings one last time, then let the rain soak the paper until the ink bled away, leaving behind little more than a faint outline of the life that once haunted her.